Hello YouTube, I'm coming to you live from my computer science class at Adelphi University. We're going to create the Google Android in less than 15 minutes. So let's see, starting off I've got screencast keys enabled, so whatever I do you should be able to see that happening down here. I'm going to start off by shrinking all the menus here just by pressing A bunch of times. Let's see, and I'd like to start off by loading the background image from last time. Let's see, I want to open. This should be located on my desktop. I should have a picture of an Android. Awesome. And to minimize that. Alright. So, right now we can't see it because we need to be in an orthogonal mode. There's our friendly little Android. First thing I'm going to do is delete the default cube. Press X to delete. Then Shift A to add a cylinder. I'm going to move that up. Make that a little bit larger. And extend that. Press G to grab it, just reposition it so it's very close to the right side. S to scale, X to stretch, and I like to create a nice Android colored skin for that, so I'll go to New, create a new material. I'm going to rename that material Android. I'm going to set the color for that. And recall the hex color is AACC66. That's close enough. Still looks a little bit funny, so I'm actually going to smooth shade that. First part of our Android is done. I'd like to rename that for convenience for later, so I'll go over here to cylinder and rename that body. I'm going to turn it off for a second while I load the rest of the pieces I'm going to need. Shift A to add a new mesh, go down to the UV sphere, drag it up to approximately the correct position, scale it. We're going to use the top half of this for the Android's head. G to grab, that looks pretty close to right. Tab into edit mode, A to deselect, B to box select, grab these bottoms, actually A to select again. One thing I forgot, I want to click this button down here in order to select both the front and back vertices at the same time. We'll see that'll save us time later. Okay, again, B to box select, drag, grab these bottom ones, delete, enter, excellent. Tab to go back into edit mode. I want to apply the Android material I just created. Apply smooth shading to that. I'll make it a little bit bigger too. There we go. What a marvelous head. So good, I will rename it as head. And I will fix capitalization, because I'm particular like that. Alright, now I'm going to create some feet. Shift A to add a mesh, another UV sphere. Grab it, put it in position. Shift and middle mouse button, scroll up a little bit so I can see what I'm doing more clearly. Right, put it in approximately the correct position. Tab to enter the edit mode. B to box select. I'm going to grab the top ones and delete them away. Box select this top row. Scale in the Z direction. Oh, not scale in the Z direction, sorry. I want to grab, bring it up in the Z direction. I'll make it go a little bit higher than I need to. That looks great. Tab to leave edit mode. Apply the Android material. Smooth shade it. Rename this leg underscore R for right leg. Now I don't want to create a whole nother leg. What I'm going to do is Shift D to duplicate, hit escape, and I'm going to reposition this one manually, going over to the properties object tab. This is going to be the left leg, so I'll name it leg underscore L and swap the X position to be positive. Fantastic, he has two legs. Next I need to create some antennas. So again, I will Shift D, duplicate, and I'm actually going to use this as one of the antennas. G to grab it in position and kind of zoom in. Shift and middle mouse button. Again, I'm just positioning. I still want a front view. And I'll make this a little bit smaller. So S to scale and shrink that down a bit. It's about the right size. R to rotate it. Nope, that's G. R to rotate, spin it around. G again to put it in about the right direction. Now I need to stretch it out a little bit. Let me right click and make this invisible temporarily. I want to make this a little bit longer so I don't see that gap there. So I'll tab into edit mode, G to grab, Z once for global and Z a second time for local. Stretch that out. Marvelous. Tab to leave that mode. I need one more antenna, so Shift D to duplicate. Escape because I don't actually want to move it. I'm going to go over here and I'm going to change the X coordinate, change the sign of that, and I need to rotate it in position, so I'll introduce a negative sign in front of that. Looks marvelous. He looks angry, but that's okay. We won't see those bottom parts once we make the head visible again. Okay, I'd really like to rename those. Those aren't really legs, those are antennae. So A-N-T-E-N-N-A, right, and antenna, A-N-T-E-N-N-A, left. Excellent. Our android is coming along very nicely. Now we need to give him a couple of arms on either side. So, again, I will create another UV sphere, Shift A, Mesh, go to UV sphere, G to grab it, position it, S to scale it, make it a little bit smaller, a little bit more precise, zoom in. Next, tab into edit mode. I'm not going to delete half of it, but this time I will stretch it up a little bit. So B to box select the top half of the vertices, G to grab, Z because we're going in the Z direction, let's make it a little bit larger, tab yourself out of edit mode, apply the material that we called Android, make this shading smooth. Marvelous. We need a leg on the other side, so let's Shift D to duplicate this. Escape because I don't want to move it with the mouse. Object, I'm going to switch its X coordinate so it appears on the other side. There we go. 2 arms. Of course, I want to name them. That's our left arm, so left, I'll say arm underscore L. This is our right arm, so arm underscore R. Next, our android needs a couple of eyes, so I'm going to introduce another UV sphere. Shift A, click on UV sphere. It's a little bit big, S to scale, bring it down. Want to color it black, so go over to Materials, New Material. I'll call this black because it's going to be black. Click on the color wheel, pull down to dark, give it nice smooth shading, and grab, I want to position it in about the right location. Looks kind of weird, you can't see it right now, but that's okay, we'll fix that momentarily. Just make sure that this orange dot appears in about the right location for his eye. Now we're going to go to View, go on up to top. Now I'm going to drag it forward by clicking on the green arrow, so his eye peeks out a little bit. Now I'll go back to the front view. I want to duplicate this, I want to give him 2 eyes, so I will Shift D to duplicate, escape. Now I'll head on over to object mode. That new eye, I want to flip it around the x-axis, so let's make that positive. And I want to name these eyes something better than sphere, so I'll name this I underscore L, and the other sphere I'll name I underscore R. So now we have ourselves a nice little android. I'm going to disable the background image because I don't need that anymore. Of course, you can reposition things a little bit if you want, but you see we've got a nice android. Next, we want him to move and dance for us, so we need to give him an armature. So you've got an android, you want to give him some bones to help him move around a little bit. So we're in object mode, I'm going to press Shift A, and we're going to add, not a mesh, but we're going to add an armature, specifically a single bone. Now you notice, while this is selected, you've got some new options over in your Properties menu. I'm going to click on Object Data. To make it easier to work with the bones, I'm going to click on X-ray. That means whenever I drag this, I can always see it regardless of whether it's inside or outside my Android. So I'm going to make this the backbone. I'll position it right about here and click. If I view from the top, you'll see that this is actually inside him right now, but because X-ray is turned on, you can actually see that. Alright, so I'm going to go back to front view. Front orthogonal view is the easiest way to kind of work with anything, really. I'm going to tab over into edit mode. I'm going to start to play with this a little bit. Let's scale it up. So the backbone should be relatively large. Oops, scale one more time. That looks good. I'm going to start extruding bones to form the rest of a skeleton. Hit E to extrude, or right click on this first. Hit E to extrude, kind of drag that up. I've got a head bone. Fantastic. I should probably name these bones as I go along so I don't have to do it all at the end. I'll press N to go over into this menu again. Go over to Item. Now if I right click on these things, I see the names. So this is bone. I will rename this as backbone. Make life easier later. I'll right click on this. Bone 002, I will call this head bone. Now I need to extract bones for the arms and for the legs to control those. What I'll do is I'll actually turn on X mirroring so I only have to do it once, not twice. So while one of the bones is selected, we're in edit mode. If you click this little box in the tools menu for X-axis mirror, when you click on a joint, instead of pressing E to extrude, I'll press Shift E, which will allow me to grab 2 bones all at once. And it'll just make life a little bit easier. What I do with one bone will automatically be mirrored to the other. I'll shrink that menu. Now I want to kind of detach these bones from this right here. So I will press Alt-P. That brings up the parenting menu. These bones are all connected, but I want to disconnect that one. So now if I press G to grab, now I can move them around a little bit. Grab it, I'll press R to rotate it so it's facing downwards. And again, G to grab it. Just position it right around the arms. I also want to name these bones. I'll name this one, not backbone L, but arm bone L. And over to the right, I'll name this arm bone R. I need 2 more bones for the leg, so I'll go back to my main joint that controls everything else. I'll press Shift-E to extrude 2 bones at the same time. And again, I will select one of them, Alt-P, disconnect this one. And if I push G to grab again, we'll see it's disconnected. R to rotate, spin it down. These will be a little bit smaller because these will be leg bones, so I'll press S to scale and make it a little bit smaller. G to grab and kind of move it into position right here. So these are the main bones of the android. I want to rename these as well. Again, this isn't backbone L, but let's say leg bone R. This on the right is not backbone R. I'll make this leg bone R. Oops. Sorry, this one on the right, this is our right, this is the android's left. This should be leg bone L. Over here, this should be leg bone R. Cool, we've got a skeleton. Hooray! But the skeleton isn't really linked to the android yet. If I were to say grab one of these, I'm going to switch from edit mode into pose mode. If I were to say grab this bone, G, the bone moves, but the arm doesn't move with it. So, what will I do? Well, we're going to set up parent-child relationships between the parts of the mesh and the bone. So, I'm going to go back over into object mode. I'm going to right-click this arm, hold down Shift, right-click a bone. Well, really, I just want to right-click one bone, so maybe I'll go back into pose mode momentarily. Okay, so when I click on the bones, I'm in pose mode, which will make it easier to select just one. And then I will go back and right-click on this. So I've right-clicked an arm, hold down Shift, right-click a bone. I'm going to hit Control-P to set up the parenting relationship. I'll parent it as a bone. I'm going to do the same thing for each other part of the body. I'm going to right-click the head, Shift, right-click this bone, and I will hit Control-P to set up the parenting relationship. Right-click until I get the arm selected, hold down Shift, right-click the corresponding bone, Control-P for a parenting relationship, bone. Right-click until you get this selected, Shift, right-click, Control-P, parent. Right-click, Shift, right-click, Control-P, parent. Right-click, Shift, right-click, Control-P, parent. While I'm parenting things, one more thing I might want to do is if I move the head, notice the rest of the head doesn't come along with it. So what I'd also like to do is reset all these little pieces right here, the antennas and the eyes, to be controlled by the motion of the head, which is in turn controlled by the head bone. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to select everything, and I'm going to do something, object, apply location, and object, apply rotation and scale, just so nothing inherits anything that I don't want it to. I'm going to right-click on, say, the left eye. I'm going to go on over to its data sheet, and in the properties menu I'm going to change its parent to head. So now if I clicked on the head, if I were to move the head, that eye would come along with it. Now I need to do the same for each other part of the head. Right click that eye, change the parent to the head. Right click this antenna, change the parent to the head. Right click this antenna, change the parent to a head. And there you go. Now you've got a completely rigged android. If I were to now say go into, I'll deselect everything by pressing A and go into, I'll right click, select the armature. Now if I grab one of these, now the arm moves with it, which is great, except android arms don't really move like that. So the last thing I have to do, I want to fix the distance between each of these. So I'm going to add a constraint to the bone, something called an inverse kinematic restraint. Right click on one of the bones, head over to your properties menu, and the bone with a little chain link, that's a bone constraint. I'm going to add a constraint, an inverse kinematic, change the chain length to 1. So what is that done? Well, now if I grab this bone and I push G, notice now he waves in a very nice fashion. It's not changing the distance between this bone and the backbone.